Hey guys, welcome back to the Vintage Watch Guy. If you like the video, please like and subscribe below. So today I want to talk about Omega. Originally I had in mind making a video about Omega, the way I did about Rolex, the history of Omega. I go through all the different parts of it, but I think a couple things took me away from that. One is that I feel like Omega doesn't have uh, as a, as much of a clearly defined story or pathway as Rolex does. Like Rolex is all about reliability, durability. Omega has several different trends within it that make it a more complex story. It's also a little bit older, and the varieties of watches is more broad. So I sort of moved away from that, and I just want to sort of talk about my collection and just kind of sprinkle it in with different things about Omega. I will say that there's a lot of people who think that Omega collectors and Rolex collectors are sort of different breeds. There's a lot of generalizations about Omega collectors. People, I think there's some grain of truth to it. I mean, obviously a lot of people collect both. I think Rolex collectors tend to be more focused on, Rolex is the best brand, therefore I collect Rolex, and be focused on, the best Rolex. Like, the Paul Newman Daytona is the best Rolex, therefore I must have Paul Newman Daytona, or, like the Double Red Sea Dweller or something. It's like everyone's focused on specific references, whereas I think Omega tends to be a little bit more diverse. I will say the Speedmaster community and the Rolex community have in common the fact that they both focus on the minutiae, because I feel like that's because a lot of Speedmasters look similar and a lot of Rolex references look similar. So then to distinguish between the different ones in vintage, they go into the small details. But anyway, not here to talk about Speedmaster Day or Rolex. We're going to talk about my collection of Omegas. Let's start with this little guy. This is a Omega 265 movement. It's a manual wound in rose gold. You see it's a very plain, sort of simple dress watch. It just has the Omega logo. It has double marker at 12 and single markers around otherwise. The one at 6 is missing to make room for the sub-seconds. Sub-seconds doesn't have a separate sub-dial, just a crosshair. And yeah, it's overall very simple, very beautiful manual wound watch. Omega does have this trend through its history of movements. So the company is one of the few watch companies that's named after a movement. It was Louis Brand's watch company. They had a few different brands under his umbrella, but they made the Omega movement, which was a movement that at the time was in the late 1800s was a very modern and sort of revolutionary movement in that it had interchangeable parts. It wasn't made like single piece by single piece by single piece, each one finished, in a slightly different way by a bunch of different small producers in small little factories or workshops in different parts of the area. This was all had sort of centralized production, factory production, and parts were interchangeable. This was something that's actually pioneered by the American companies like Elgin, Waltham, Hamilton. But Omega was one of the first brands to bring to the Swiss world. And by having parts that were interchangeable and that could be produced, the watches became much more easy to service. And by having better quality control, it became a very reliable and also was a very well-designed and accurate movement. So the Omega movement was actually what created the Omega brand. In terms of manual wound, you hear a lot about the 30T2 movements. These were very popular during World War II, especially in the British military. I noticed that a lot of Omega collectors, I feel like it's a very popular brand to collect in Great Britain. I'm not sure if this is because of this World War II legacy, but 30T2 movements were found in a lot of British World War II watches, and helped that very robust, very accurate movement was later brought into dress models like this one, which probably dates from I would guess maybe the early 60s or sometime in the 50s or somewhere from the mid 50s to the early 60s. And so it had this legacy of this reliable, robust movement. Now going into automatics, these are some watches from my little Cmaster series. When you think Cmaster, you tend to think of the Cmaster 300, which was a dive watch with a rotating bezel, sort of competitor to the Submariner, and the current Cmaster models like that as well. But the original Cmasters, I used to have a bumper. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. I sort of think of Cmaster line as being like Omega's response to the Rolex Oyster. It was a supposedly waterproof case. I guess when they were first made, they were waterproof. That was sporty, yet could also function as a dress watch. If you see the original ones, they have these sort of like thick lugs. Some people call them beefy lugs. Beefy lug Cmasters. I believe there's a guy on Instagram who has that handle. And they, had bumper movements, so they were automatically wound. They were waterproof. So you see, it's starting to sound like the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. Has the same sort of idea of being robust, sporty, yet dressy, waterproof, automatic movement. They made it a little bit different from Rolex, though. That Rolex, they made it waterproof by having a screw-down back, screw-together case, whereas this has actually a front-loading movement. So the method of waterproofing for the case was different. Also, the Rolex had a patent on the fully rotating automatic rotor, so the early Cmasters were all bumper movements. Unfortunately, don't currently have a bumper movement in my collection. I used to have 2 of them, but they sold them a while back. But they're very cool. If I get a hold of one, I'll make a video about it. But basically, bumper movements, instead of having a rotor that spins all the way around, it has a rotor that only swings through about 270 degrees of motion and has on the end a little spring on each end. And so when you move it around, you hear it and you feel it. Bing, 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 bumpers. That was made because Rolex had, as I said, had a patent on the fully rotating automatic movement until I believe the 50s. So Omega particularly made a lot of bumper movements, as did other brands. Actually, bumper movements are very reliable, very good movements, and it's more the fact that they're expensive to produce that they sort of died out. Sometimes people call them hammer movements. Maurice Grossman actually made recently a movement that's sort of like a bumper, I guess you'd call it it's sort of like a bumper movement. It's kind of like a pendulum, back and forth kind of motion, which essentially a bumper has a similar kind of motion. But anyway, Cmaster, it kind of evolved. There's different lines. I believe the tagline was suitable for town, country, and sea, something like that. So it was also supposed to be dressy. So from those original sort of a little bit sportier, beefy lugged ones, like for example, the modern reissue, the 1948 Omega Cmaster, has those kind of beefy lugs. That's a good example of what a beefy lug Cmaster looks like. But the ones I have are Cmaster DeVille's. DeVille is their dressy line. Currently today, it's also their dressy line. Cmaster DeVille was, I think it was intended as it had the characteristics of Cmaster, automatic movement, waterproof case, waterproof front-loading case, but also it was DeVille, so it was a little bit more dressy. See, the lugs are thinner. So these are a few different variations in Cmaster DeVille's. I got interested in them because I saw a GQ video that was talking about the movie Crazy Rich Asians, and in the movie, the main character, played by Henry Golding, wears a Cmaster DeVille, and so I thought that was very cool, so I collected a few of them. So this one, the 3 I have are all basically very similar. This one has a linen dial and no date, so this one's a little bit different than the other ones. The solid gold case with the sea creature on the back. This one is got onyx markers. It has a date. Also Cmaster DeVille, and also a gold case. This one doesn't have the seahorse on the back. This one's a stainless steel one with the onyx markers and the date. Again, these are automatic movements. The cases were made as waterproof originally. You sometimes see that the crowns were replaced on these. This is the correct crown for the Cmaster DeVille. You see it has the Omega logo on it. Has this look. Actually, I would caution you, if you get one of these, don't try to crack open the case back. Actually, these are front loading pieces. So in order to open the watch, you need to use a special tool to remove the crown. And I believe you have to unscrew the bezel and then pull the movement out through the front. So don't try to open these unless you really have some experience doing it, or obviously if you're a qualified watchmaker. So that's my little collection of Cmaster DeVilles. I got a little obsessed after the movie. Not really typical for me, but there you go. So this is a Omega Constellation. The Constellation line is emblematic of another trend in Omega, which is chronometer accuracy, very accurate movements. The movements for the Omega, the company, is named after movement, and Constellation was their sort of top of the line in the 50s and 60s, which was they're all chronometer rated. They're all adjusted to heat, isochronism. I think 5 or 6 positions, whichever it is. They're very collectible pieces. A lot of people collect Constellation specifically because it was the top of the line at that time. And yeah, Constellations, the movement is the best quality, especially at that time. The 500 series movement is very robust, automatically wound, very, very accurate and durable movement. They're really great watches. This one is gold capped. You can see this gold cap when you look at the back. You see the front is a gold tone and the back. Take a look at the back of the lug there. You see how the back of the lug is steel? So that means that there's a layer of gold that was melted on sort of the top of it on the front. It's definitely thicker than gold plate. It's actually a solid layer of gold. Gold filled is similar, but gold filled, you would see that the back of the watch was also gold, especially when you look at the lugs. That's how you distinguish between gold cap and gold filled. Gold plate tends to be a little bit yellower. The gold capped and gold filled tend to have more the luster of real gold. Or actually it is real gold, but it has the luster of solid gold when you look at it from the front. As far as let me just move the hands so you can see the text, which is really important when you look at these. But anyway, this has a couple of desirable features. Gold cap, yes, that's less desirable than solid gold, or perhaps less desirable than stainless steel as well. But you do find good deals for gold capped and gold filled. This has it has a couple other good traits. One is that this is a dog leg case. See how it's bent, kind of as a dog leg shape. So those are desirable, and also has a pie pan dial. So the front of the dial comes forward, and there's like facets angling backwards between the hour markers. So that's very beautiful. And you see that it's also onyx markers within the time markers and within the hands. The Constellation, see that it's centered, evenly printed, it has a star below, it's centered, and the Applied Omega logo, as well as the text. When you see Constellations, you tend to see a lot of redials, so it's important to look at the text and make sure it's evenly printed and correct, and that the star is centered, and if it has a crosshair, make sure the crosshair is centered and doesn't break up when it goes over the text, goes straight through. And this has the Constellation Observatory on the back with I believe there's 8 stars for the 8 Observatory Trial Awards that Omega won. So that's Omega Constellation, very collectible, very cool piece. This one happens to have a gold-filled beads of rice bracelet. I got this from another collector, and it fits the watch perfectly. And so that's my Omega Constellation. Then moving into the late 60s and the 70s, I have a couple of little funkier pieces. You notice I don't have a moon watch. I feel like there's so much to know about moon watches. Maybe I'll acquire one at some point, but I kind of like these other interesting pieces. So this is an Omega Cmaster. See that it's printed as Cmaster. But you notice the unusual coloring on the dial. This one's a soccer timer. So you can tell it's a soccer timer because of the characteristic colors. And also it is a soccer timer because the subdial, is for 30 minutes, but they put an additional marker for 45 minutes for a soccer half. These were issued to soccer referees in the World Cup in 1969, I believe. This one, there's an 861 movement inside. The inside of the case back is marked 1968, so it's probably made in 68 and sold in 69. There's a few different varieties of soccer timers. There's ones with white backdrops, ones with darker backdrops. But the main differences between the different soccer timer references is that this is the most simple one and smallest one, and which has no inner bezel. There's one that has a rotating inner bezel. There's one with a fixed inner bezel. So that's another variety of soccer timer, sort of like the middle range. It's a little bit bigger. And then there's the inner rotating bezel, which has another like rotating crown here. Those sometimes come in what's called a roulette wheel configuration. So they have sort of alternating colors and they're very distinctive. And that's considered the most desirable type. But for my wrist, I think this one suits me very well. I like the colors. I have it here on a racing strap that I got from the Viblenist. That's where I get most of my straps from. Got the blue, royal blue racing strap, and I think it suits the watch really well. And yeah, I think soccer timers, they're very cool references. I love the color. I love the sort of tonneau shape. Originally, there's a radial brushing. You can just sort of barely see it here. The case has been polished a bit. And there's black polish on the edges here originally, and then brushing on the side and screw down back with the Omega Seahorse logo. So yeah, that's a soccer timer, one of my favorite pieces. And the last piece I want to show you is from, I think it came out in 69, like a lot of interesting pieces did just before the end of the quartz crisis was made into the early to mid 70s. This is an Omega MemoMatic. I think if you are an alarm watch collector, I think MemoMatic is really a very important reference to have. MemoMatics, I think, are really cool. In terms of the history of alarm watches, they're really important because it's like, I think even to this day, maybe the only alarm watch that's, I'm not sure about the latest Jaeger-LeCoultres, but I may be totally mispronouncing that, JLCs. But these watches were automatically wound with both the movement as well as the alarm function, which is a very unusual thing. The problem with most alarms are made with two separate barrels, so that one mainspring powers the watch, the time itself, and the other one powers the alarm. Because when the alarm goes off, it takes all the energy out of the barrel, out of the mainspring. So if you had the original alarm watches, the early ones had a problem where the alarm would go off and then there was no power reserve, and you have to wind the watch again, which was obviously very impractical. So most calibers solved it by having two separate crowns, like the AS 1475 series, the JLC 489. So you wind the movement separately with and obviously the Vulcan Cricket was the first one to do this. But it had, instead of having two crowns, you wind one way, you wind the alarm, wind the other way, you wind the other barrel, which is the cool thing about Vulcan Crickets. So most of them had two barrels, so one powered the alarm and one powered the movement. so that the alarm would go off and then you could wind it again, and it wouldn't affect the power reserve of the movement. And the miniaturization of the barrels is one of the technical hurdles to creating functional alarm watches. So as far as this one goes, it's very cool because it has only one barrel, one mainspring that powers both the alarm as well as the movement, and it's both automatically wound. Now, JLC was the first one to come out with the automatic winding for the movement, and later Seiko with the MemoMatic came out with automatic winding for the movement as well. And interestingly enough, the early JLC movements are actually bumpers, not full auto rotors, because they need to leave a little space for the little hammer inside to hit the pin on the case to make the thing vibrate and make it loud. So actually they're bumpers, and it was a while before they figured out how to make it a fully automatic rotor. This one has a fully winding 360-degree rotor inside. So yeah, it's very cool. It's similar in some ways to the MemoMatic. It's the Seiko MemoMatic in that it has a date, which is an innovation as well with JLC. But this has a date, and it also is fully automatic movement. But the difference with Seiko, why this one is more complex, is that first of all, the date adjustment is quick set, which is very cool. It's the only alarm with a quick set that I'm aware of, at least in terms of vintage, and also it has an interesting mechanism whereby when the alarm goes off, it only rings for about 20 seconds, and then it shuts itself off, and it preserves the power in the barrel. And just by walking a little more, it'll wind it up enough to set up the next one. The main problem with these things is that initially this one wasn't doing it, but now it is, and a lot of these alarms do it, is that when you turn the, let me see if I can, oh, there's the alarm. It's not very loud. It's a big case. I'm not sure, that maybe has something to do with the auto rotor inside, and also the thing's not fully wound. But the problem with a lot of these things, let me see if I can make it do it. Is that when you change the time on the alarm, the hands also move, which is annoying. Mine wasn't doing that originally, but now it is. I'm not totally sure how to fix that, but I noticed that's a very common issue with these things. Oh, another interesting thing about this is that the alarm can be set to the minute. I think the accuracy was it has to the minute or to the maybe within 3 minutes, but it has actually a minute indicator on the alarm. You see there's an arrow. Most ones have either a hand or an arrow that points to the time, but this one actually has a minute indicator because the alarm accuracy is to the minute. That and the quick set date and the single barrel winding both the movement and the alarm make this watch very unique and very cool, and I think sort of underappreciated in terms of alarm watch collecting. And it's a very complex watch, to make a watch that has an alarm, that has a quick set date, that has to the minute accuracy on the alarm, to make a switch from the alarm barrel, or make the barrel power both the alarm and have it switch off after a certain period of time and still have enough juice to keep going. It's a very complex watch, and it's sort of one of their last hurrahs before the quartz crisis really hit them and they started having a lot of issues. But anyway, that's my collection of Omegas. I love Omega. I think it's probably my most collected brand. I think there's a lot of stuff outside of Speedmaster. I know a lot of people only collect Speedmaster. Definitely there's a strong Constellation community. And people who like dive watches sometimes collect Cmaster 300s. But there's like a whole world of Omega. It's really cool. If you're into Omega or want to get into Omega in more depth, I really suggest getting the Omega Mania catalog from 2007. It has almost every collectible Omega that I can think of, including the Speedmasters, the Mark series. Those are very cool. Flight Masters. There's a whole variety of Omegas. They're really, really cool. Oh, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Omega 321 movement that powered the, I'm not sure if it powered the original Moon watch, but definitely the pre-Moon watches. It was a very robust manual wound caliber, chronograph caliber. It was a column wheel. It was a precursor to the 861 that I have in this one. And yeah, it's recently been reissued by Omega. Really cool movement. Actually, a lot of other companies took the Lemania version of that and finished it to a high degree. And for example, it powers Patek chronographs with, at that time in the past. And I think the Vacheron Corne de Vache chronograph, I think it still has a caliber that's produced by Lemania 321 that they finished to their specifications. So it's a very high quality movement. I heard parts are expensive to get, and also the watches are expensive to get. Some people have started collecting the Cmasters that have chronographs that have 321 movements in them. But yeah, that's a very cool part of Omega as well. And another thing about Omega calibers and Lemania, this caliber, you sometimes see this caliber in non Omega alarms. There was a Lemania, I forget the exact name of it, but there's a caliber that's produced for non-Omega watches, so you find in other watches as well. But the way you can tell that it's all set up the same, but it doesn't have the minute accuracy. It doesn't have the minute mark, it just has an arrow. So that's how you can tell the difference between the calibers. A little bit simplified. I'm not sure if it had a quick set date too. It might have, I'm not totally sure. But it definitely doesn't have to the minute accuracy. I'm sure there's a lot I'm forgetting about Omega, but it's a very cool brand. And yeah, so if you liked the video, please like and subscribe below, and I will catch you in the next one.